The flash drive was worth $40 million, dollars, and the woman bleeding in Landon Hayes' passenger seat had maybe 10 minutes before the people hunting her burned down half of Chicago to get it back. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know why armed men in unmarked SUVs were tearing through the South Side like a military extraction gone wrong. All he knew was that 15 minutes ago, he'd been closing up his garage on the worst night of the winter, and now he was driving through a blizzard with a stranger who kept whispering the same thing over and over. "They'll kill anyone who helps me." Landon glanced in the rearview mirror at the headlights gaining behind them and thought about his 6-year-old daughter asleep 3 miles away, wondered if this was the stupidest thing he'd ever done, and pressed the accelerator harder anyway. If you want to see how a single choice on a frozen Chicago street pulls 3 broken lives into something that looks almost like family, stay until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. And let's see what happens when ordinary people stop running. Landon Hayes was 32 years old, and he was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. He stood alone in the garage bay of Hayes Auto Repair at 11:30 on a Thursday night, wiping grease off a torque wrench that had seen better decades. The space heater in the corner rattled like it was trying to die, pumping out just enough warmth to keep his fingers functional. Outside, the snowstorm that had been threatening all week finally made good on its promise. Wind screamed past the metal roll-up door. Snow came down in sheets so thick the streetlights barely cut through. The sedan he'd been working on, a 2009 Honda with a transmission that sounded like a bag of bolts in a dryer, sat silent on the lift. He'd finished the job an hour ago, but he hadn't left yet. Leaving meant going home to the empty apartment in Pilsen, where his daughter Sophie was already asleep, watched over by Mrs. Graham from 3B, who charged $20 a night and fell asleep by 9. Leaving meant another night of reheated pasta and the kind of quiet that made his chest feel hollow. He missed his wife. 3 years gone, and the missing hadn't dulled even a little. Landon set the wrench down, pulled off his work gloves, and checked his phone. One text from Mrs. Graham: "Sophie's out cold, all good here." He typed back a thanks, pulled on his coat, and killed the lights. The cold hit him like a fist the second he stepped outside. He locked the door, bent his head against the wind, and started the walk toward the Blue Line station 6 blocks north. He'd driven to work that morning, but the truck had started making a noise that meant expensive, so he'd left it parked behind the garage and decided to suffer the train instead. The streets were empty. Everyone with sense had stayed inside. Snow piled against storefronts and buried parked cars up to their door handles. Landon kept his hands jammed in his pockets and tried not to think about the heating bill waiting at home. He was halfway to the station when he saw the woman. She was standing in the recessed entrance of a closed bodega, pressed back into the shadows like she was trying to disappear. Barefoot. No coat. Soaking wet. Her hair plastered to her face, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking so hard he could see it from 20 feet away. Landon stopped walking. For a long moment he just stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, snow building up on his shoulders, staring at her. Part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan and 4 years of raising a kid on his own, screamed at him to keep moving. Chicago was full of people with problems, and getting involved in someone else's disaster was a luxury he couldn't afford. But she looked up, and their eyes met, and Landon saw something in her face that he recognized. Terror. Pure, animal terror. He walked over. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low and even. "You okay?" Stupid question. She was obviously not okay. She flinched, took a half step back, then seemed to register that he wasn't whoever she was afraid of. Up close, he could see she was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark eyes and the kind of sharp, fine-boned face that belonged in a museum painting. She was dressed in business clothes, blouse, slacks, heels that she wasn't wearing anymore because her feet were bare and already turning blue. Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely get the word out. "I need help." "No kidding." Landon shrugged off his coat and held it out. "Here, put this on before you freeze to death." She stared at the coat like it might be a trap, then snatched it and wrapped it around herself. It swallowed her. She was tiny, maybe 5'3", and Landon was 6'1" and built like someone who'd spent his life lifting heavy things. "What happened?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked past him at the street like she expected something to come roaring out of the snow. "I can't." She shook her head. You should go. If they see you with me. Who's they? Please. Her voice cracked. Just go. I'm serious. They'll kill you. Landon had heard a lot of things in his life, but the way she said it, flat, factual, like she was reporting the weather, made something cold settle in his gut. Okay, he said slowly. Let's say I believe you. Where are you planning to go? She didn't answer. You got a phone? She shook her head. Wallet? ID? Anything? Another head shake. So you're barefoot in a blizzard with no coat, no phone, no money, and people trying to kill you. Landon rubbed his face. That about cover it? Yes. Great. He looked up and down the empty street, then sighed. Come on. Where? Train station. There's a security guard there. You can warm up, call someone, figure out your next move. I can't call anyone. Why not? Because anyone I call dies. She said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that for a second Landon wondered if he was dealing with someone who'd slipped a few gears. But then he looked at her eyes again, sharp, focused, completely sane, and realized she meant every word. All right, he said. Then we're going to the station, you're going to sit somewhere warm, and I'm going to call the cops. No! She grabbed his arm, fingers digging in hard. No cops. They're paid off. Half of them are already looking for me. Landon stared at her. Lady, he said quietly, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but I've got a 6-year-old daughter at home and a life that's barely holding together. I can't get mixed up in whatever this is. I know. She let go of his arm. I'm sorry. Just go. Forget you saw me. She turned away, hunched into his coat, and started walking in the opposite direction. No shoes, no plan, just walking into the storm like she'd rather freeze than drag someone else into her nightmare. Landon watched her go. He thought about Sophie, thought about the bills, thought about every reason he had to turn around and mind his own business. Then he thought about the look in the woman's eyes. Damn it, he muttered. He caught up to her in 3 strides. Okay, he said. New plan. You're coming with me. She stopped, turned. What? My place. It's not far. You can warm up, clean up, and we'll figure out what to do next. I told you, Tess. Yeah, I heard you. People trying to kill you, cops are dirty. Everyone you know is in danger. Got it. He started walking toward the station. You coming or not? She hesitated, then followed. They didn't talk on the train. Landon sat near the door, scanning the nearly empty car for anything that looked wrong. The woman, he still didn't know her name, sat beside him, staring at her hands. She'd stopped shaking, but she looked exhausted, used up. At the Pilsen stop, they got off and walked the 4 blocks to his building in silence. The snow had eased up a little, but the wind still cut like razors. Landon kept his head on a swivel, watching parked cars and shadowed doorways, feeling like an idiot for bringing a stranger with a target on her back anywhere near his home. But he didn't turn around. His building was a 3-story walk-up that had been falling apart since the 70s. He unlocked the front door, led her up to the 2nd floor, and stopped outside apartment 2D. I've got a kid, he said quietly. She's asleep. We're not waking her up, and we're not scaring her. Understood? The woman nodded. Landon unlocked the door. Inside, Mrs. Graham was asleep on the couch, mouth open, glasses crooked on her face. The TV played some late-night infomercial on mute. Down the short hallway, Sophie's door was cracked open, and Landon could see the edge of her bed in the glow of her nightlight. He touched Mrs. Graham's shoulder, and she jolted awake. Oh, Landon, Lord, you scared me. Sorry. He handed her $20. Thanks for staying. Mrs. Graham stood, squinting at the woman standing behind him. Who's this? Friend, Landon said. She's having a rough night. Mrs. Graham looked like she wanted to ask more questions, but she just tucked the money into her purse and shuffled toward the door. All right then. You take care, honey, she said to the woman and left. Landon locked the door behind her, then turned to the woman. Bathroom's down the hall. 2nd door. There's towels under the sink. I'll find you something to wear. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. She disappeared into the bathroom and Landon stood in the middle of his cramped living room, wondering what the hell he'd just done. He went to Sophie's door and eased it open. She was buried under blankets, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, breathing slow and steady. Safe. For now. He closed the door and went to his bedroom. Found an old t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that would drown her, but at least they were clean. He knocked on the bathroom door and handed them through when she cracked it open. 10 minutes later, she emerged. Hair still damp, face scrubbed clean. She looked younger without the grime and terror, fragile, like something that might break if you held it too tight. "Sit," Landon said, nodding toward the couch. She sat. He went into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and made 2 cups of instant coffee because it was all he had. When he came back, she was staring at her hands again. He handed her a mug and sat in the chair across from her. "All right," he said. "Start talking." She looked up. "You don't want to know." "Probably not. Talk anyway." She took a shaky breath. "My name is Arya Vale," she said. I was a financial analyst at Kalen Global. Do you know it?" Landon shook his head. "Big investment firm, offices downtown. They manage billions." She wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its heat. 3 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in some of the accounts I was reviewing. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense. Transfers to shell companies. Payments labeled as humanitarian aid that went nowhere. "You're saying they're stealing. Not just stealing, laundering, embezzling, funneling investor money into offshore accounts and covering it up with fake charity projects." She looked at him. $40 million. That's how much I can prove. And I think it's just the beginning. Landon set his mug down. "So you went to the cops?" "I went to my supervisor. Then I went to his supervisor. Then I went to the head of compliance." Her voice hardened. "They all knew. Some of them were part of it." "What about the feds? SEC?" "I was going to. I had everything ready. Documents, spreadsheets, transaction records. I copied it all to a flash drive. I was supposed to meet with a federal investigator tomorrow morning." She paused. "Tonight, someone tried to kill me." Landon went very still. "What happened?" "I was working late. Everyone else had gone home because of the storm. I was in my office, finishing the last of the files, when I heard voices in the hallway. Shouting. I looked out and saw 2 men, not security, not anyone I recognized. They were going office to office, opening doors." She swallowed. "I grabbed the flash drive and ran, took the stairs, got out through the parking garage, but they saw me." "And they chased you?" "All the way to the south side. I ditched my phone because I knew they could track it. Lost my shoes somewhere. I was trying to get to a friend's place, but every time I thought I'd lost them, another car would appear, so I hid." She looked at him. "And then you found me." Landon leaned back in his chair, processing. "This flash drive," he said. "You still have it?" Arya reached into the pocket of the sweatpants and pulled out a small black drive. "Right here. And the people looking for you, you think they're still out there?" "I know they are." "How?" "Because $40 million buys a lot of motivation." Landon rubbed his jaw. He wanted to tell her she was paranoid, that she'd blown this out of proportion, that she should go to the cops or the FBI or anyone except a broke mechanic with a kid to protect. But he'd seen her face when she talked, heard the fear, and he'd been around enough liars in his life to know she wasn't one. "Okay," he said. "So what's the plan?" "I don't have one. I barely made it this far." "You said you were supposed to meet a federal investigator tomorrow. You still have their contact info?" "It was in my phone." "Name?" She shook her head. "I can't remember. It was arranged through a third party, someone I trusted." "And you can't call them now because I don't have a phone, and because if I use yours, they'll trace it." Landon stood, went to the window, and looked out at the street. Snow still falling. A few cars parked at the curbs, nothing moving. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to get you somewhere safe." "You don't have to do this." "Yeah, I know. I mean it. If they find out you helped me, then they find out." He turned to face her. "Look, I don't know you. Don't know if your story's even true, but I'm not throwing you back out into the snow, and I'm not letting some corporate goons terrorize people in my city. So you're staying. We clear?" Arya stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't mention it." He headed toward the hallway. "You can sleep on the couch. I'll grab you a blanket." He was halfway to the closet when Sophie's door opened. She stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her rabbit dangling from one hand. Daddy? Landon's heart sank. Hey, kiddo, what are you doing up? I heard voices. Sophie looked past him at Arya. Who's that? Arya stood up slowly, awkwardly, like she wasn't sure what to do. This is Miss Arya, Landon said. She's a friend. She's staying with us tonight. Sophie studied Arya with the unsettling intensity that only 6-year-olds could manage. Why? Because it's snowing really hard, and she needed a place to stay. Sophie walked over to Arya and looked up at her. Are you sad? Arya blinked. What? You look sad. Sophie, Landon said gently. It's late. Back to bed. But Arya knelt down so she was eye level with Sophie. I am a little sad, she said, but your dad's helping me feel better. Sophie considered this. Then she held out her rabbit. You can borrow Mr. Flopsy. He helps when I'm sad. Arya's eyes went bright, and for a second Landon thought she might cry. Thank you, she said, taking the rabbit carefully. I'll take really good care of him. Okay, Sophie yawned. Night, Daddy. Night, Miss Arya. Night, sweetheart. Sophie padded back to her room and closed the door. Arya stood, still holding the rabbit, staring at it like it was made of glass. She's sweet, she said, her voice thick. Yeah. Landon's chest felt tight. She is. Arya looked at him. I'm putting her in danger just by being here. Maybe, but she's already in danger every day just by living in this world. At least this time we're trying to do the right thing. I hope you still think that tomorrow. Landon didn't answer. He got her a blanket and a pillow, made sure the door was locked, and went to bed. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside, and wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Around 3 a.m, he got up and checked the street from his bedroom window. Nothing. Just snow and shadows. But the feeling in his gut, the same one that had kept him alive in Kandahar, wouldn't go away. Something was coming. When morning broke gray and cold, Landon got up, made coffee, and checked on Arya. She was awake, sitting on the couch, still holding Mr. Flopsy. You sleep? He asked. Not really. Yeah, me neither. Sophie woke up half an hour later, delighted to find Arya still there. She chattered through breakfast, cereal and toast, asking Arya 100 questions that Arya answered with surprising patience. Where do you work? Do you have a rabbit? Do you like cartoons? Landon watched them and felt something shift in his chest, something fragile and dangerous. After breakfast, he walked Sophie to Mrs. Graham's apartment for the day. She was off school because of the snow, and Mrs. Graham agreed to watch her for an extra 20. When he got back, Arya was at the window, staring down at the street. See something? He asked. Black SUV, parked across the street. It wasn't there before. Landon moved to the window. She was right. A black Escalade, windows tinted, engine running, just sitting there. Could be nothing, he said. Could be. They watched it for 10 minutes. It didn't move. Okay, Landon said. New plan. We're leaving. Where? My garage. It's got a back exit and better sightlines. We can figure out next steps from there. What about Sophie? She's safe with Mrs. Graham, and the less she knows about this, the better. Arya nodded. They bundled up, Arya in a spare coat Landon had that was 3 sizes too big, and slipped out the back stairwell. Landon led her through the alley, moving fast but not running, trying to look like 2 people going about their day. The garage was 15 minutes on foot. By the time they got there, Landon's shoulders were knotted with tension. He unlocked the side door, got Arya inside, and locked it behind them. The garage was freezing, but it felt safer than the apartment. He fired up the space heater and pulled out his phone. I'm calling a friend, he said. Ex-military. He might know someone who can help. Okay? Landon dialed. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Hayes, the hell you want this early? Danny, I need a favor. Of course you do. What is it this time? I need to get someone in touch with a federal investigator. Someone who won't ask questions and won't tip off the wrong people. A pause. This about that girl the news is talking about? Landon went cold. What news? Turn on the TV, man. Landon found the old television in the corner of the garage and flipped it on. It took a minute to find a news station, but when he did, his stomach dropped. The headline read, Kaylin Global Analyst Missing After Alleged Breakdown. And there, on the screen, was Arya's face. The reporter's voice was smooth and professional. Arya Vale, 26, a financial analyst at Kaylin Global, was reported missing late last night after colleagues expressed concern for her mental state. According to sources within the company, Vale had recently exhibited erratic behavior and made unfounded accusations against senior staff. Authorities are asking anyone with information to come forward. Landon muted the TV and looked at Arya. She was staring at the screen, her face pale. "They're calling me crazy," she said quietly. "Yeah. They're going to say I made it all up." "Probably." She turned to him, and her eyes were fierce. "I didn't. I believe you." "Do you?" Landon met her gaze. "Yeah, I do." Danny's voice crackled over the phone. "Hayes, you still there?" "Yeah, I'm here." "You in over your head?" "Feels like it." "Then get out. Whatever this is, it's not your fight." Landon looked at Arya. At the flash drive, she was clutching like a lifeline. At the exhaustion and fear and desperate, stubborn hope in her eyes. "Too late," he said, and hung up. The television stayed on, looping the same story every 12 minutes. Each time Arya's face appeared on screen, Landon watched her flinch like she'd been slapped. The news anchor's voice was calm, authoritative, the kind of tone that made lies sound like facts. Erratic behavior, unfounded accusations, concern for her mental state. They were building a narrative, and Arya was the villain in it. Landon turned the TV off. "They're good," Arya said quietly. She was sitting on an overturned crate near the space heater, arms wrapped around herself. "I'll give them that. They're very good." "Who's running point on this?" Landon asked. "At the company. Who'd have the juice to get the news involved this fast?" "Could be anyone in the executive suite, my guess. Richard Kaylin himself." "The CEO?" "Founder and CEO. The company's named after him. He built it from nothing 30 years ago, and he's got connections everywhere. Politicians, media, law enforcement." She looked at Landon. "If he wants me painted as unstable, I'm unstable. If he wants me disappeared, I disappear." Landon leaned against the workbench, thinking. His phone sat on the counter between them, dark and silent. He'd turned off the location services after hanging up with Danny, but he wasn't naive enough to think that made him invisible. If Kaylin Global had the resources Arya claimed, they could track him a dozen other ways. "The flash drive," he said. "What's actually on it?" Arya pulled it from her pocket and held it up. Transaction records going back 18 months. Wire transfers, account statements, emails between executives discussing how to hide the money. There's also a ledger showing which charities are fake and which offshore accounts the funds actually went to. And that's enough to prove it? It's enough to start an investigation. Once the feds dig in, they'll find more. But this, she shook the drive, this is the smoking gun. Then we get it to the feds. How? I don't have the contact info for the investigator I was supposed to meet. I don't even know their name, and if I walk into an FBI field office, I'll be arrested before I get past the lobby. Why? Because by now, Kaylin's lawyers have already filed a report claiming I stole proprietary information. They'll say I'm a disgruntled employee trying to sabotage the company. The second I show my face, I'm in custody, and this drive gets locked in an evidence room where it'll conveniently disappear. Landon rubbed his jaw. She was right. Walking into a federal building was a trap. "What about a lawyer?" he asked. "Someone who could authenticate the documents and file them properly?" "Same problem. Any lawyer I contact becomes a target, and Kaylin's legal team will bury them in motions and countersuits until the story dies." "So what? We just sit here?" "I don't know." Arya's voice cracked. "I've been running for 12 hours. I haven't slept. I can't think straight. I thought I had a plan, but it's falling apart, and She stopped, took a breath. "I'm sorry. You didn't sign up for this." Landon watched her for a moment. She looked small, sitting there in his oversized coat, trying to hold herself together. He thought about Sophie, about the bills stacked on his kitchen counter, about the fact that his entire life was balanced on a knife's edge, and getting involved in this could tip him right over. But he also thought about the way Arya had knelt down to talk to Sophie last night, The way she'd held Mr. Flopsy like it was the most important thing in the world. The way she'd said thank you like she'd forgotten people could be kind. "All right," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to eat something because neither of us has had a real meal in the last day. Then we're going to figure out who you were supposed to meet and how to contact them without getting traced. And if that doesn't work, we'll find another way." "There might not be another way." "Then we'll make one." Arya looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not hope exactly, but something close. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Landon shrugged. "Because you asked." "That's it?" "That's it." She didn't look like she believed him, but she didn't argue either. There was a diner 2 blocks away that Landon trusted. The owner, a woman named Marisol, had been feeding him burnt coffee and decent eggs for the past 3 years and never asked questions. He locked up the garage and they walked over through streets still thick with uncleared snow. The diner was warm and loud, filled with the smell of bacon grease and the sound of silverware scraping plates. Marisol looked up when they walked in, raised an eyebrow at Arya, but just pointed them toward a booth in the back. They sat. Landon ordered coffee and breakfast for both of them. When Marisol walked away, Arya leaned across the table. "You come here a lot?" she asked. "Couple times a week? And she doesn't care that you just brought in someone the news says is missing?" Marisol minds her business. It's one of her better qualities. The food came fast. Eggs, toast, hash browns that were more grease than potato. Arya ate like she hadn't seen food in days, which maybe she hadn't. Landon watched her, sipping his coffee, thinking. "This investigator you were supposed to meet," he said. "How'd you set it up?" Arya swallowed a bite of toast. "Through a guy named Colin Park. He's a reporter, does investigative stuff. I reached out to him a few weeks ago when I realized how big this was. He's the one who put me in touch with the Fed." "You trust him?" "I did, but I haven't heard from him since yesterday afternoon." "You think Kaylin got to him?" "I think it's possible." Landon pulled out his phone. "What's his number?" "I don't remember. It was in my contacts." "Where does he work?" "Freelance, mostly, but he used to write for the Tribune." "All right, I'll look him up." Landon opened a browser and typed in the name. A few hits came up: articles, bylines, a LinkedIn profile. He clicked on the most recent article. It was dated 2 weeks ago, something about housing fraud on the north side. "This him?" Landon turned the phone so Arya could see the photo attached to the byline. She nodded. "That's Colin. Says here he's got a Substack. Maybe there's a contact form. They'll trace it." "Not if I use the diner's Wi-Fi and a burner email." Arya looked at him. "You know how to do that?" "I know how to not be an idiot on the internet. That count?" She almost smiled. Landon set up a throwaway email account using a fake name, then navigated to Colin Park's Substack page. There was a contact form buried at the bottom. He typed out a message, keeping it short and vague. "Need to talk about Kaylin Global. Urgent. Friend of AV." He hit send. "Now what?" Arya asked. "Now we wait." They finished eating in silence. Landon paid, left a decent tip, and they walked back to the garage. The black SUV that had been parked outside his apartment building earlier was gone, but Landon's gut still felt tight. He kept scanning the streets, watching for cars that lingered too long or faces that appeared twice. Back in the garage, Arya paced while Landon checked his phone every 5 minutes. An hour passed, then 2. No response. "Maybe he didn't see it," Arya said. "Maybe. Or maybe he's compromised. Also possible." "This isn't working." Landon looked up. "You got a better idea?" She stopped pacing. "Actually, yeah, I do." "Let's hear it." "The shareholder meeting. It's tomorrow morning at 10. Downtown at the main office. It's a big deal. Board members, major investors, press. Kaylin always gives a keynote address." "Okay, so if I can get into that building, I can release the files publicly, live, in front of everyone." Landon stared at her. "You want to walk into the headquarters of the company that's trying to kill you and broadcast evidence of their crimes in real time?" "Yes." "That's insane. It's also the only way to make sure the evidence actually gets out. If I hand it to one person, they can bury it. But if I release it in front of 100 witnesses with cameras, it becomes news. Kalen can't control the narrative if the whole world is watching. Landon shook his head. You'll never make it past security. Not alone. But if I had help, no. Landon, absolutely not. You're talking about a suicide mission. I'm talking about the only option I have left. There are always other options. Name one. Landon opened his mouth, closed it. He couldn't. Arya stepped closer. Look, I know this is crazy. I know it's dangerous. But if I don't do this, they win. Kalen walks away with $40 million. I get labeled as a lunatic, and everyone who trusted me ends up buried in the same lie. I can't let that happen. And what happens to you after you release the files? You think Kalen's just going to let you walk out of there? I don't know. But at least the truth will be out. Landon looked at her, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the desperation, the stubborn refusal to quit even when everything was stacked against her. He saw himself in that, the version of himself that had kept going after his wife died, that had gotten up every morning and put one foot in front of the other because Sophie needed him to. Give me a minute, he said. He walked to the far end of the garage and called Danny again. Twice in one day, Danny answered. I'm starting to feel special. I need another favor. Of course you do. Can you get me blueprints for a building downtown? What building? Kalen Global Headquarters. A long pause. Hayes, what the hell are you into? Something stupid. No kidding, and you need blueprints, why? Because I'm about to do something even stupider, and I'd like to not die. Danny sighed. You're lucky I like you. Give me 2 hours. I need it in one. Make it 90 minutes. Deal. Landon hung up and walked back to Arya. Okay, he said. Let's say I help you. How do we even get into the building? I still have my employee badge. It'll get us past the first checkpoint. And when security sees your face and realizes you're the missing analyst everyone's looking for, then we move fast. That's not a plan. That's a prayer. You have a better idea? Landon thought. Maybe. If we can get the blueprints, we can find a way in that bypasses the main lobby. Service entrance, loading dock, something like that. And then? Then we get you to wherever this shareholder meeting is happening, you do your thing, and we get out before Kalen's people turn the place into a war zone. Arya nodded slowly. That could work? It probably won't. I know. And if it goes sideways, we're both dead. I know that too. Landon rubbed his face. I need to check on Sophie first. Make sure she's okay. Of course, he called Mrs. Graham. She answered on the third ring, sounding slightly annoyed. Landon, I'm watching my show. Is Sophie all right? She's fine. Eating lunch, coloring, asking when you're coming back. Tell her I'll be there tonight. And Mrs. Graham, if anyone comes by asking about me, you don't know anything. What? Just trust me. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me. Landon, what's going on? I'll explain later. Just keep her inside, okay? He hung up before she could argue. When he turned around, Arya was watching him. You're a good dad, she said. I'm a dad who's about to break into a corporate skyscraper and probably get arrested. Not sure that qualifies as good. You're doing it so someone else doesn't get hurt. That counts. Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. 90 minutes later, Danny called back. Got your blueprints, he said. Sending them now. But Hayes, this is a bad idea. I know. These people you're going up against, they don't play fair. I know that too. And you're doing it anyway. Yeah, Danny sighed. You need backup. You call me. I will. No, you won't. But I had to offer. The blueprints came through as a PDF. Landon opened it on his phone, and he and Arya huddled over the screen, studying the layout. The building was 43 stories, all glass and steel. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for the executive conference room on the 38th floor. There, Arya said, pointing, loading dock on the south side. It's how they bring in supplies. There's a service elevator that goes straight to the upper floors. Security? Probably one guard at the dock entrance. 2 if we're unlucky. And inside? Cameras everywhere. Security checkpoints on every floor. But if we move fast and stay out of sight, we might make it. Landon zoomed in on the service elevator route. What about after you release the files? How do we get out? Same way we came in. That's assuming they don't lock the building down the second you go public. They will, but if we're fast, we're not going to be fast enough. Arya looked at him. So what do you suggest? Landon thought. Then he pulled up a different part of the blueprint. Fire exits, here, here, and here. They're on the outside of the building, connected to emergency stairwells. If we can get to one of these before they seal the elevators, we can take the stairs down. That's 38 flights. You got a better idea? She didn't. They spent the next 2 hours going over the plan, refining details, identifying weak points. Landon mapped out the route from the loading dock to the conference room, timing each leg based on walking speed. Arya wrote down the steps for releasing the files. She'd need access to the building's internal network, which meant finding a terminal or connecting her own device to their system. By the time the sun started to set, they had something that almost resembled a plan. We go in tomorrow morning, Landon said. 9:30. That gives us 30 minutes to get into position before the meeting starts. Arya nodded. And Sophie? I'll drop her at school. She'll be safe there. What if something happens to us? Landon met her eyes. Then Mrs. Graham has instructions. She'll take care of Sophie until my brother can get here from Ohio. You've thought about this. I'm a single parent. I think about it every day. Arya looked away. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. You didn't drag me. I walked in on my own. Still. They locked up the garage and headed back to Landon's apartment as the streetlights flickered on. The temperature had dropped again, and the wind carried the sharp bite of another storm rolling in. The walk was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they got to the building, Landon checked the street. No black SUVs, no suspicious cars. Just the usual neighborhood chaos, kids playing in the snow, someone shoveling their stoop, a delivery truck idling at the curb. Upstairs, Sophie was watching cartoons with Mrs. Graham. She jumped up when Landon walked in. Daddy! Miss Arya! Hey, kiddo! Landon scooped her up, held her tight. Are you staying for dinner, Miss Arya? Sophie asked. Arya smiled, and it looked almost real. If that's okay with your dad. It's okay, Landon said. Mrs. Graham left, and Landon made spaghetti because it was cheap and Sophie loved it. They ate at the tiny kitchen table. Sophie chattering about her day, about the snowman she and Mrs. Graham had tried to build, about the cartoon she'd been watching. Arya listened, asked questions, laughed at Sophie's jokes. For a little while, it almost felt normal. After dinner, Landon got Sophie ready for bed. He read her a story, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. I love you, kiddo, he said. Love you too, Daddy. She yawned. Is Miss Arya going to stay forever? I don't know. Why? Because I like her. She's nice. Yeah, she is. Sophie's eyes were already closing. Landon watched her for a moment, then turned off the light and closed the door. In the living room, Arya was sitting on the couch, staring at the flash drive in her hands. You okay? Landon asked. Not really. She looked up. What if this doesn't work? Then we'll figure out something else. And if we don't make it out? Landon sat down beside her. Then we don't. But at least we tried. Arya was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I had a normal life once. Apartment in Lincoln Park. Good job. Friends. I went to yoga classes and farmers markets. I was boring. Boring's underrated. I know. I keep thinking about how I could have just ignored what I found, how I could have looked the other way and kept my boring life. Why didn't you? Because it was wrong, and I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing. She laughed, but it sounded bitter. Guess that makes me an idiot. Makes you decent. Decent people don't usually end up running for their lives. No, Landon said, but they're the only ones who make things better. Arya looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't look scared, just tired. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not treating me like I'm crazy. For believing me. She gestured around the apartment. For all of this. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive tomorrow. She smiled, small and sad. Right. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Eventually, Arya lay down on the couch, and Landon gave her the same blanket and pillow from the night before. He went to his room but didn't sleep. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the photo on his nightstand, him and his wife and Sophie. back when Sophie was just a baby, back when life made sense. He thought about what he was about to do, thought about the risk, thought about Sophie waking up tomorrow and him not being there. But he also thought about the look on Arya's face when she talked about doing the right thing, about the $40 million stolen from people who trusted Kalin Global, about the way the world worked when people like Richard Kalin could buy their way out of consequences. He thought about what kind of man he wanted to be, and he decided he could live with the risk. Morning came too fast. Landon got up, made breakfast, packed Sophie's lunch. She was groggy and grumpy, the way she always was before school. Arya sat at the table, quiet, drinking coffee. "You ready?" Landon asked. Arya nodded. He walked Sophie to school, kissed her goodbye, and watched her disappear into the building. Then he went back to the apartment where Arya was waiting. "Let's go," he said. They took the train downtown, both of them silent. The city was waking up, streets filling with commuters, the sky gray and heavy with the promise of more snow. Landon kept his head down, watching for anyone who looked too interested. Arya did the same. At the stop nearest to Kalin Global headquarters, they got off and walked the last 3 blocks. The building loomed ahead, all glass and steel, a monument to money and power. Landon checked his watch. 9:15. "You sure about this?" he asked. Arya looked up at the building, then at him. "No," she said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Landon nodded, and they walked toward the loading dock. The loading dock was tucked behind the building, accessed through an alley that smelled like garbage and exhaust fumes. A semi-truck idled near the entrance, its driver scrolling through his phone while a crew unloaded pallets of office supplies. Landon and Arya walked past like they belonged there, heads down, moving with purpose. The security guard at the dock entrance was exactly where the blueprint said he'd be. Middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing a uniform that looked 2 sizes too small. He glanced up from his tablet as they approached. "Help you?" he asked. Arya pulled out her employee badge, the one she'd shown Landon the night before. It was creased and slightly bent, but the photo was clear. She held it up with the kind of confidence that came from doing it 100 times before. "Arya Val, Financial Analysis. Forgot something in my office." The guard squinted at the badge, then at Arya's face. For a moment, Landon thought they were blown. The news had shown her photo on loop for the past 24 hours, but the guard just grunted and waved them through. "Sign in," he said, nodding toward a clipboard on the desk. Arya scribbled a name that wasn't hers, and Landon did the same. The guard didn't look. He was already back to his tablet, watching a video with the sound off. They stepped into the building. The service corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit, lined with concrete walls and exposed pipes. It smelled like cleaning chemicals and old coffee. Landon followed Arya toward the service elevator at the far end, his pulse hammering in his ears. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every footstep echoed too loud. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. They stepped inside. Arya pressed the button for the 38th floor. "So far, so good," she said quietly. "Don't jinx it." The elevator climbed. Landon watched the floor numbers tick upward on the display, each one feeling like another step closer to something he couldn't take back. He'd been in bad situations before. Kandahar had been full of them, but this was different. Back then, he'd had training, backup, a clear mission. Now he was flying blind, trusting a woman he'd known for less than 2 days, betting everything on a plan that was more hope than strategy. The elevator slowed, stopped. The doors opened onto a hallway that looked nothing like the service corridor below. Here, everything was sleek and polished. Glass walls, modern art, carpet so thick it swallowed sound. A few people in business attire moved past, talking on phones, carrying tablets. None of them looked twice at Landon and Arya. Arya led the way, moving fast but not running. She seemed to know where she was going, navigating the turns and corridors with the muscle memory of someone who'd walked these halls 1,000 times. Landon stayed close, scanning faces, watching for anyone who looked like security. They passed a break room, a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, an open workspace where a dozen people sat at desks, typing, talking, existing in the kind of mundane normalcy that felt surreal given what Landon and Arya were about to do. "Here," Arya said, stopping in front of a door marked Executive Conference Room 38B. She checked her watch. 9:45. Meeting starts in 15 minutes. Where do we set up? There's a media control booth in the back. That's where they run the presentation feeds. If I can get in there, I can plug into their system and broadcast the files to every screen in the room. And the people in the booth? Usually just one AV tech, maybe two if it's a big presentation. Which this is. Yeah, Landon nodded. All right, let's do it. They circled around to the side entrance. The door was locked, but Arya swiped her badge and it clicked open. Inside, the conference room was massive. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a view of downtown Chicago that probably cost more than Landon made in a year. The 4th wall was a projection screen, currently dark. The media booth was at the back, a small glass-enclosed space elevated above the main floor. Landon could see 2 people inside, setting up equipment, adjusting cables. 2 techs, he said. I see them. How do you want to play this? Arya thought for a moment. I'll go in, say I need to check something for my department. You stay out here and keep watch. And if they don't buy it, then we improvise. Landon didn't love the plan, but they were out of time. He nodded. Arya climbed the narrow staircase to the booth. Landon watched from below as she knocked on the glass door. One of the techs, a young guy with headphones around his neck, opened it. Arya said something Landon couldn't hear. The tech looked confused, then annoyed. He shook his head. Arya kept talking, gesturing toward the equipment. The tech hesitated. Then he stepped aside and let her in. Landon let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Arya moved to one of the terminals, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. She plugged it in, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The second tech, a woman with short gray hair, looked over, frowned, said something. Arya responded without looking up. Then the woman reached for a phone on the wall. Landon's stomach dropped. He took the stairs 2 at a time, pushed through the booth door. The woman was already dialing. Hey, Landon said, keeping his voice calm. Don't do that. The woman looked at him, eyes wide. Who are you? Someone who really needs you to hang up that phone. She didn't. Her finger moved toward the keypad. Landon crossed the booth in 2 steps and gently took the phone from her hand. He hung it up. I'm sorry, he said, but we can't let you call security. The young tech stood up, looking ready to do something stupid. Landon held up a hand. Sit down, both of you. We're not here to hurt anyone. Then what are you here for? The woman asked, her voice shaking. Arya looked up from the terminal. To tell the truth. The woman's eyes went to Arya's face, and recognition dawned. You're the analyst. The one on the news. That's me. They said you stole company files. They lied. The young tech pulled out his phone. Landon moved fast, taking it before the kid could unlock it. Sorry, Landon said again. You'll get it back in about 20 minutes. This is insane, the woman said. Yeah, Landon agreed. It is. Arya finished typing and pulled the flash drive. Done. The files are loaded into the presentation queue. As soon as the meeting starts and they pull up the first slide, my files will override the feed and broadcast to every screen in the room. And everyone outside the room? The presentation's being live streamed to the company's internal network. Every employee in the building will see it. Plus, the meeting's being recorded for the shareholder archive. That recording goes public later today. Landon looked at the 2 techs. You 2 stay here. Don't touch anything. Don't call anyone. When this is over, you can tell security we forced you. No one's going to blame you. The woman nodded slowly. The young tech just stared. Landon and Arya left the booth and descended the stairs. The conference room was starting to fill up now. Men and women in expensive suits filtered in, shaking hands, making small talk. Landon spotted a face he recognized from the news coverage. Richard Kalin himself. Late 60s, silver hair, the kind of smile that looked practiced. That's him, Arya whispered. Yeah. I worked for him for 3 years. I used to think he was brilliant. And now? Now I know he's just good at hiding who he really is. Kalin took a seat at the head of the table. Other executives flanked him, arranging papers, sipping coffee. At the far end of the room, a camera crew set up equipment for the live stream. Everything looked normal, professional, calm. Landon checked his watch, 9:58. We need to get out of here before this starts, he said. Once those files go live, this whole place is going to explode. I know. They moved toward the side door they'd come through. But before they reached it, the main doors at the front of the room opened and 2 security guards walked in. They weren't the rent-a-cop types from the loading dock. These were professionals. Fitted suits, earpieces, eyes that scanned the room like they were cataloging threats. One of them looked directly at Arya. "We've got a problem," Landon said quietly. The guards started moving toward them. "Go," Arya said. "Now." They pushed through the side door and into the hallway. Behind them, Landon heard the guard shout something. Footsteps pounded on the carpet. Landon grabbed Arya's hand and ran. They sprinted down the corridor, past startled employees who pressed themselves against the walls. Landon's mind raced, pulling up the blueprint from memory. Fire exit, east side of the building, 2 hallways over. They turned a corner and nearly collided with another guard coming the opposite direction. Landon didn't think. He just reacted, lowering his shoulder and driving into the man's chest. The guard stumbled back, hit the wall, and Landon kept moving. "Left!" Arya shouted. They turned left, then right, then left again. The hallways blurred together. Behind them, more shouting, more footsteps. An alarm started blaring, loud and insistent. There. The fire exit. A red door marked with the universal symbol for emergency escape. Landon hit the door at full speed. It burst open and they stumbled into the stairwell. The alarm was even louder here, echoing off concrete walls. Landon looked down. 38 flights of stairs stretched below them, disappearing into shadow. "Move," he said. They started descending. Arya's breathing was already ragged. Landon wasn't much better. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he kept going. Behind them, the stairwell door crashed open. Voices echoed from above. "They're in the stairwell, east side." Landon pushed harder. They dropped 5 floors, then 10. Arya stumbled, caught herself on the railing. Landon grabbed her arm, steadied her. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't keep this up." "You don't have a choice." They kept going. 15 floors. 20. The guards were gaining. Landon could hear them getting closer, their footsteps ringing on the metal stairs like drumbeats. At the 25th floor, Landon made a decision. "In here," he said, pulling Arya through the door and into the hallway. This floor was quieter, fewer people. They ran toward the center of the building, looking for somewhere to hide, somewhere to catch their breath. Landon spotted a supply closet, tried the handle, locked. "Here!" Arya pointed to an empty office with the door ajar. They ducked inside, closed the door, and crouched behind a desk. Landon's heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Arya pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. Footsteps passed in the hallway. Voices. Then silence. Landon checked his watch. 10:04. The meeting had started. He pulled out his phone, opened the browser, and navigated to Kalen Global's internal network portal. It required a login, but Arya leaned over and typed in her credentials. The screen loaded. And there it was. The shareholder meeting, streaming live. Richard Kalen stood at the head of the table, smiling, welcoming everyone. The camera panned across the room, showing the executives, the investors, the board members. Everything looked perfect. Then the screen flickered. Kalen paused mid-sentence, frowning. He looked toward the media booth. The screen flickered again, and then the presentation feed cut out entirely. For a moment, there was nothing. Just a black screen. Then the files started playing. It began with a spreadsheet, rows and columns of transactions, highlighted in red. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The camera in the conference room zoomed in on the projection screen, capturing every detail. Kalen's smile vanished. The spreadsheet dissolved into a scanned document, an email chain, subject line, read to Q3, disbursement adjustments. The message was brief, clinical. Redirect humanitarian funds to offshore accounts per our discussion. Ensure paper trail reflects standard charitable allocation. The sender, Richard Kalen. In the video feed, someone in the room stood up. Then another. Voices rose, confused, angry. Kalen was shouting now, pointing at the media booth, demanding someone shut it down. But the files kept coming. More spreadsheets, more emails, bank statements showing transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Photos of falsified charity receipts. A ledger with handwritten notes detailing exactly how the money was hidden. $40 million. all of it laid out in excruciating detail. Landon looked at Arya. She was watching the screen, her face pale, her eyes bright. "It's working," she whispered. In the conference room, chaos erupted. Investors were on their phones. Executives were shouting at each other. The camera crew kept filming, broadcasting every second to the internal network, and beyond that, to the shareholder archive, to the public record. Kalen lunged toward the media booth, but security held him back. Someone killed the projection feed, but it was too late. The files had already played. The damage was done. Landon's phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "Turn on the news." He switched to a news app and pulled up a live stream. A reporter stood outside Kalen Global headquarters, speaking into a camera. "Breaking news this morning as explosive financial documents were just broadcast during a private shareholder meeting at Kalen Global. The documents, which appear to show evidence of large-scale embezzlement and money laundering, were leaked by a former employee who has been missing since yesterday. Federal investigators are reportedly en route to the building now." Arya let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "We did it," she said. Landon nodded. "Yeah. Now we just have to survive it." He stood, pulled Arya to her feet. They couldn't stay here. The building was locked down, and security would be sweeping every floor. "Fire exit," he said. "We keep going down." They slipped out of the office and back into the hallway. It was emptier now, most people either in their own offices or clustered around screens watching the news. Landon and Arya moved fast, heading for the stairwell. They made it 2 floors before the door above them burst open again. "There!" Landon didn't look back. He just ran. They hit the 20th floor, then the 15th, then the 10th. His legs felt like concrete. Arya was flagging, her steps getting slower. "Almost there," Landon said, though he had no idea if that was true. 8th floor, 5th, 3rd. At the 2nd floor, the stairwell door swung open and 3 guards rushed in. They saw Landon and Arya and started shouting. Landon grabbed Arya and reversed direction, climbing back up. They hit the 3rd floor, burst through the door, and found themselves in another hallway. This one was packed with people evacuating. The alarm was still blaring. Emergency lights flashed. Landon pulled Arya into the crowd, using the chaos as cover. They moved with the flow of people toward the main lobby, trying to blend in. The lobby was pandemonium. Hundreds of employees streamed toward the exits. Security tried to control the flow, but there were too many people. News vans were already parked outside, cameras rolling. Landon spotted a side exit near the building's coffee shop. He steered Arya toward it, weaving through the crowd. They were 10 feet from the door when someone grabbed Landon's shoulder. He spun, ready to fight. But it wasn't a guard. It was Colin Park, the reporter. Landon recognized him from the photo on his byline. "Arya Vale?" Colin said, looking at her. Arya nodded, wary. "I got your message. I've been trying to find you. Are you okay?" "We're leaving," Landon said. "Right now." "Wait." Colin pulled out a phone. "I need a statement. On the record. The feds are going to want to talk to you, but if you go public first, you control the narrative." Arya looked at Landon. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the fear, but also something else. Resolve. "Do it," Landon said. Colin hit record. "Arya Vale, can you confirm that you're the source of the documents broadcast during today's shareholder meeting?" Arya took a breath. "Yes, I'm the source. I worked at Kalen Global for 3 years, and during that time I uncovered evidence of systemic fraud and embezzlement orchestrated by senior executives, including CEO Richard Kalen. $40 million was stolen from investors and hidden through fake humanitarian projects. I tried to report it internally, but I was silenced. I tried to go to the authorities, but I was hunted. So I did the only thing I could. I made the evidence public. Why now? Because it was the right thing to do, and because people deserve to know the truth." Colin lowered the phone. "That's going to be everywhere in an hour." "Good," Arya said. They pushed through the side exit and into the cold morning air. The street was chaos. Police cars, news vans, crowds of people. Landon led Arya away from the building, cutting through alleys and side streets until they were blocks away. Only then did he stop. Arya leaned against a brick wall, breathing hard. "We made it," she said. "Yeah." "I can't believe we actually made it." Landon's phone buzzed. A call from an unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Hayes?" The voice was male, authoritative. This is Special Agent Marcus Delgado with the FBI. We need to speak with you and Ms. Vale immediately. Landon looked at Arya. She nodded. Where? Landon asked. Federal Plaza. We'll have agents waiting at the north entrance. You'll be safe. How do I know that? Because Richard Kalin is already in custody, and half his executive team is being rounded up as we speak. You did the right thing, Mr. Hayes. Now let us finish it. Landon hung up. They want us to come in, he said. Do we trust them? I don't know, but I don't think we have a choice. They walked to Federal Plaza. The building was massive, imposing, the kind of place that made you feel small. 2 agents in dark suits met them at the entrance and escorted them inside. The next 4 hours were a blur. Interviews, statements. Arya handed over the flash drive and walked the agents through every document. Landon told them everything he knew, which wasn't much. Mostly, he just sat in a conference room drinking bad coffee and wondering if Sophie was okay. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, Agent Delgado came back. You're free to go, he said. We have everything we need. That's it? Landon asked. For now. We'll probably need follow-up statements, but the hard part's done. Ms. Vale, you'll need to stay in the city for the next few weeks while we build the case, but you're not under arrest. You're a witness, a very brave one. Arya nodded, too tired to speak. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. Landon and Arya stood on the steps of the federal building, watching the city move around them. What now? Arya asked. Now I pick up my daughter from school, and then I go home and try to pretend the last 2 days didn't happen. Think that'll work? Not even a little. Arya smiled, small and sad. Thank you for everything. You already said that. I know, but I mean it. Landon looked at her. What are you going to do? I don't know. Find a new job, I guess. Somewhere far away from corporate finance. You've got a place to stay? She hesitated. I'll figure something out. Landon sighed. You can crash on my couch. Until you get back on your feet. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Arya looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. They took the train back to Pilsen together. The car was crowded, full of people heading home from work, oblivious to everything that had happened. Landon felt like he was in 2 worlds at once. The one where he'd just helped expose a billion-dollar crime, and the one where he was still just a mechanic trying to pay his bills. When they got to the apartment, Mrs. Graham was waiting with Sophie. Daddy! Sophie ran to him, and Landon caught her, held her tight. Hey, kiddo, you have a good day? Uh-huh. We learned about fractions, and Miss Arya's on TV. Landon looked at the television. Sure enough, there was Arya's face on the screen. The chyron read, Whistleblower exposes massive fraud at Kalin Global. Mrs. Graham looked at Landon, then at Arya, then back at Landon. You two want to tell me what's going on? She asked. Long story, Landon said. I've got time. Sophie tugged on Arya's sleeve. Are you staying again? Arya smiled. Yeah, for a little while. Good. You can help me with my homework. And just like that, the world kept turning. That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep clutching Mr. Flopsy and asking 100 questions about why Miss Arya was famous, Landon sat at the kitchen table with a beer he wasn't drinking and stared at his phone. It had been ringing all evening, news outlets, reporters, people he hadn't talked to in years suddenly very interested in his life. He'd ignored all of it. Arya sat across from him, wrapped in the same oversized coat she'd been wearing since the loading dock, nursing a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. You okay? Landon asked. She looked up. I keep waiting for it to feel real. What part? All of it. The fact that it's over, that Kalin's actually in custody, that I'm sitting here instead of running. She shook her head. It doesn't feel real. Give it time. How much time did it take you? After your wife died? The question caught him off guard. He set the beer down, studied the label like it might have answers. I'll let you know when it happens, he said finally. Arya's expression softened. I'm sorry, it's fine. He looked at her. You asked Mrs. Graham about it? She mentioned it. Said you'd been raising Sophie alone for 3 years. That you were doing a good job, considering. Considering what? Considering how hard it is. Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the radiator clank and the muffled sound of someone's TV through the wall. "I talked to Agent Delgado again," Arya said eventually. "He called while you were putting Sophie to bed." "What'd he say?" "The case is moving fast. They've frozen Kalen Global's accounts, arrested 4 more executives. They're calling it one of the biggest corporate fraud cases in a decade." "Good." He also said the shareholders are filing a class action lawsuit against Kalen, the board, everyone involved. She paused. "And they want me to testify." "You going to?" "I don't have a choice. The evidence I provided is the backbone of the case. Without my testimony, half of it gets thrown out." "When?" "Trial probably won't start for months, but depositions begin next week." Landon leaned back in his chair. "You need a lawyer?" "The FBI is connecting me with someone, a prosecutor who specializes in white-collar crime." She looked down at her hands. "They're also talking about witness protection, in case anyone from Kalen's inner circle decides to retaliate." "You think they will?" "I don't know. Kalen's locked up, but he's got allies, people who profited from what he did, people who don't want the truth coming out." "So you disappear?" "Maybe. For a while." She met his eyes. "I'm scared, Landon." "I know. Not of Kalen. Not of the trial. I'm scared that once this is all over, I won't know who I am anymore. For 3 years, my life was that job. My identity was being good at spreadsheets and presentations and playing the game, and now all of that's gone, and I don't know what's left." Landon understood that feeling better than she probably realized. After his wife died, he'd felt the same way, like the person he used to be had disappeared and he was just going through the motions of being someone new. "You figure it out," he said, "one day at a time. And some days you don't figure it out at all, but you keep going anyway." "That doesn't sound very hopeful." "It's not, but it's honest." Arya almost smiled. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. "What?" Landon asked. "Colin Park, the reporter. He wants to do a longer interview, says every major outlet is trying to get my story, and if I don't control the narrative now, someone else will." "You trust him?" "I think so. He's the one who connected me with the FBI in the first place, and he didn't have to help us today." "Then do the interview." "You sure?" "Arya, you spent the last 2 days risking your life to tell the truth. Don't stop now." She nodded slowly. "All right. I'll call him tomorrow." The conversation drifted after that. They talked about small things, Sophie's school, the weather, the fact that Landon's truck still wasn't fixed. Eventually, Arya went to the couch, and Landon went to his room. But he didn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was still coming. Around 2 a.m, he heard a sound from the living room. Soft, muffled. He got up and found Arya sitting on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, crying. "Hey," he said quietly. She looked up, wiped her eyes. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He sat down beside her. "What's going on?" Her voice broke. "I keep thinking about all the people I worked with, the ones who weren't involved, the assistants and analysts and interns who are going to lose their jobs because of what I did. Kalen Global's going to collapse, and they're all going to suffer for it. That's not your fault, isn't it? I'm the one who blew it up." "No. Kalen's the one who blew it up. You just made sure people knew." Landon looked at her. "Those people you're worried about? They're better off knowing the truth. Better off finding new jobs at companies that aren't built on lies." "Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely." She leaned her head back against the couch. "I don't know how you do it." "Do what?" "Stay so steady. You've been through hell and you just keep going, like it doesn't touch you." Landon laughed, but it came out bitter. "It touches me. Every day. I just don't have the luxury of falling apart. Sophie needs me functional, so I am functional. That's it." "That's not it. You're more than that." "Maybe, but most days it doesn't feel like it." They sat in silence for a while. Then Arya said, "Thank you for letting me stay, for everything." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep meaning it." The next morning, Colin Park showed up at the apartment with a camera crew and a list of questions. Landon took Sophie to Mrs. Graham's place to give Arya space, then headed to the garage. He had work to catch up on. Cars that had been sitting untouched for 2 days, invoices that needed sending, a business that was barely holding together even before he'd decided to play hero. The garage was cold and quiet. Landon fired up the space heater, pulled on his work gloves, and got under the hood of a Chevy that had been leaking oil since Tuesday. The work was mindless, repetitive, exactly what he needed. He was halfway through replacing a gasket when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Yeah? Mr. Hayes, this is Jennifer Cow. I'm an attorney with Brennan and Cross. We represent several of the investors impacted by the Kalin global fraud. Landon straightened, wiping grease off his hands. Okay. I wanted to reach out because my clients are very grateful for what you and Ms. Vale did. Without your actions, they would have lost everything. I appreciate that, but I'm not looking for thanks. I understand, but my clients would like to offer you compensation for your time, your risk, and the danger you put yourself in. I don't want money. Mr. Hayes, you helped recover $40 million. A percentage of that recovery is earmarked for individuals who aided in the investigation. You're entitled to it. Landon set down the wrench. How much are we talking about? $250,000. He almost dropped the phone. He stopped, tried again. That's not necessary. It's already been approved by the settlement committee. The funds will be available within 60 days. Landon didn't know what to say. $250,000. Enough to pay off every bill he had. Enough to fix the truck, fix the apartment, put Sophie through college someday. Enough to breathe. I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork, Jennifer Chow said. Congratulations, Mr. Hayes. You've earned it. She hung up before he could argue. Landon stood in the middle of the garage, staring at his phone, trying to process what had just happened. Then he called Arya. Hey, she answered. You okay? I just got a call from a lawyer. She said the investors are giving me money. A lot of money. How much? $250,000. There was a pause. Then Arya laughed, bright and disbelieving. Landon, that's incredible. Is it real? This isn't some scam? It's real. The settlement fund is part of the recovery process. They set aside a percentage for whistleblowers and people who assist in the investigation. You qualify. What about you? I'm getting the same. Maybe more, since I'm the primary witness. Landon sat down on an overturned crate. I don't know what to do with that kind of money. You'll figure it out. But Landon, this is good. You deserve this. He wanted to believe her. That night, after Sophie was asleep and Arya had finished her interview with Colin, they sat in the living room and watched the segment air on the 10 o'clock news. Arya's face filled the screen, calm and composed, telling her story in a way that made it impossible not to believe her. You were amazing, Landon said when it was over. I was terrified. Didn't show. Good. Over the next 2 weeks, the case against Kalin Global dominated the news cycle. More arrests. More revelations. The company's stock crashed. Employees were laid off in waves. Arya spent hours every day on the phone with lawyers, agents, journalists. Landon went back to work, trying to keep the garage running while fielding calls from reporters who wanted to interview the guy who'd helped bring down a billionaire. He said no to all of them. Sophie adjusted to Arya's presence with the easy adaptability of kids. She liked having someone else around, someone who helped with homework and watched cartoons and didn't mind playing pretend for hours. Arya seemed to like it too. She was good with Sophie in a way that felt natural, unforced. One evening, Landon came home to find them in the kitchen, making cookies. Flour everywhere. Sophie's face covered in chocolate chips. Arya laughing at something Sophie had said. What's this? Landon asked. We're baking, Sophie announced. Miss Arya's teaching me. I can see that. Arya looked up, grinning. She's a natural. Landon leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Something in his chest felt tight, but it wasn't painful. It was something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Later, after Sophie was in bed and the kitchen was mostly clean, Arya sat at the table with a mug of tea. I got the witness protection details today, she said. Landon's stomach dropped. And? They want me to relocate. New city, new identity, at least until the trial's over and they're sure there's no threat. Where? They're not telling me yet. Somewhere out west, probably. When do you leave? 2 weeks, maybe less. Landon nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral. That's good. You'll be safe. Yeah. Sophie's going to miss you. I'm going to miss her too. They didn't talk about what Landon would miss. They didn't have to. The days blurred together after that. Arya spent her mornings at the federal building, giving depositions, reviewing evidence. Landon worked. Sophie went to school. And in the evenings, they came together in the tiny apartment that had started to feel less empty. One night, Landon found Arya on the couch, staring at her laptop. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "Job listings. For after this is all over." "Find anything?" "Not really. Turns out, being the face of a massive corporate scandal doesn't make you super employable. You could do something else. Something that's not finance." "Like what?" "I don't know. Something that matters." She looked at him. "You think what I did mattered?" "I know it did." Arya closed the laptop. "I've been thinking about that, about what comes next. And I think I want to help people like the ones Kaylin hurt. People who lose everything because someone powerful decided to cheat. I don't know what that looks like yet, but it feels right." "Sounds like a plan." "It's barely even an idea. Most good things start that way." 3 days before Arya was supposed to leave, Sophie came home from school and announced she'd made something for her. "What is it?" Arya asked. Sophie pulled a folded piece of construction paper from her backpack. Inside was a drawing, 3 stick figures standing in front of a house, one tall with dark hair, one smaller with curly hair, one tiny with pigtails. "That's you and Daddy and me," Sophie explained, "so you don't forget us." Arya's eyes went bright. "I could never forget you." "Promise?" "Promise." Sophie hugged her, fierce and tight, and Arya held on like she was trying to memorize the feeling. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Landon and Arya sat on the couch, not talking, just existing in the same space. "I don't want to go," Arya said quietly. "I know. But I have to." "I know that too." She turned to look at him. "What if I didn't? What if I stayed here and figured it out without witness protection?" "Then you'd be taking a risk." "I've taken risks before. This is different. You've got enemies now, real ones. And I've got people who care about me. That's new too." Landon didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her to stay, to figure out a way to make it work. But the other part, the part that had spent 3 years keeping Sophie safe, knew that wasn't fair. "Do what's right for you," he said finally. "Whatever that is, I'll support it." Arya nodded, but she didn't look convinced. The next day, Agent Delgado called. There'd been a development. "We picked up 2 more suspects this morning," he said. "Associates of Kaylin's who were planning something. I can't give you details, but it was serious enough that we're accelerating Ms. Vale's relocation." "When?" Landon asked. "Tomorrow morning. I'm sorry for the short notice, but we can't take chances." Landon hung up and found Arya in the living room. "They're moving you tomorrow," he said. Her face went pale. "Tomorrow?" "Yeah." "I'm not ready." "You don't have a choice." She stood, paced to the window, stared out at the street. "I wanted more time." "I know. I wanted to say goodbye properly. To Sophie. To—" She stopped, shook her head. Landon crossed the room, stood beside her. "You'll see her again. This isn't forever." "You don't know that." "No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway." She looked at him, and something passed between them. Something unspoken, but understood. That night, they told Sophie together. She cried, which made Arya cry, which made Landon's throat tight. They promised to write letters, promised a video call when it was safe, promised that this wasn't the end. Sophie fell asleep holding Mr. Flopsy and the drawing she'd made. In the morning, a black SUV pulled up outside the building. This time, it wasn't a threat, just a ride. Arya stood in the doorway, a single bag slung over her shoulder. She looked at Landon. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "You're welcome. Take care of yourself, and Sophie." "I will." She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him. It was quick, awkward, but real. "I'll see you again," she said. "Somehow." "I'm counting on it." And then she was gone. Landon stood in the doorway, watching the SUV disappear into traffic. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. He thought about the past 2 weeks, about how his life had been turned upside down by a stranger in the snow, and how now that stranger felt like something more. He closed the door, locked it, and went to check on Sophie. She was still asleep. Landon sat on the edge of her bed, watching her breathe, and made a promise to himself. He'd use the money from the settlement to build something better. For Sophie. For himself. Maybe even for Arya, if she ever came back. Because she would come back. He believed that. He had to. The first month without Arya felt like learning to walk again after forgetting you had legs. Landon went through the motions, woke up, got Sophie ready for school, worked on cars, came home, made dinner, put Sophie to bed, but everything felt off-center. Like the apartment had been rearranged in subtle ways he couldn't quite name. Sophie asked about Arya every few days at first, then every week, then slowly, less often. Kids adapted. They moved forward because they didn't know any other way. Landon envied that. The settlement money came through in early February, deposited into his account with an official-looking letter from Brennan and Cross confirming that it was real, that it was his, that he could actually use it. He stared at the balance for a long time, trying to make it feel true. $250,000. He paid off the credit cards first, then the medical bills from when Sophie had pneumonia 2 years ago, and the insurance hadn't covered enough. Then the back rent he'd been carrying like a weight on his shoulders. What was left, he put into an account for Sophie's future and a separate fund for the garage. Because the garage needed work. Real work. The kind that cost money he'd never had before. He started small. New tools. Better equipment. A real heating system instead of the space heater that barely functioned. He repainted the sign out front, fixed the busted roll-up door, replaced the cracked windows. Slowly, the place started looking less like a tomb and more like a business. Word spread. Not just because of the improvements, but because Landon's name had been in the news. People knew who he was now, the mechanic who'd helped bring down Kalen Global. Some customers came because they were curious. Others came because they respected what he'd done. Either way, the work started coming in faster than he could handle alone. By March, he hired his first employee, a kid named Marcus, 22, fresh out of trade school and hungry to learn. Landon taught him the same way he'd been taught, hands-on, no shortcuts, do it right the first time. "Why do you care so much?" Marcus asked one afternoon, elbow deep in an engine block. "Because half-assing it just means you have to do it again," Landon said. "And I don't have time to do things twice." Marcus nodded, absorbing that, and went back to work. In April, Landon got a letter. No return address. Postmarked from Denver. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Arya's handwriting. "Landon, I'm okay. Can't say much, but I'm safe. The trial's moving forward. They're saying it'll start in June. I think about you and Sophie every day. Tell her I miss her. Tell her I still have Mr. Flopsy. I hope the garage is doing well. I hope you're doing well. I'll write again when I can." Landon read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of his nightstand. Sophie was thrilled when he told her Arya had written. She insisted on writing back immediately, filling 2 pages with drawings and misspelled updates about school and the new kitten Mrs. Graham had adopted. Landon mailed it to a P.O. box Arya had included at the bottom of her letter, not knowing if it would reach her, but hoping it would. 2 weeks later, another letter came, then another. They were brief, careful, never revealing too much. But they were enough. June arrived, and with it, the trial. Landon watched it on the news when he could, catching snippets between jobs. Arya testified for 3 days straight, walking the jury through the evidence, the emails, the transactions. She was calm, precise, unshakable. The defense attorneys tried to rattle her, tried to paint her as disgruntled and unstable, but she didn't flinch. On the 4th day, Richard Kalen took the stand. He denied everything, called Arya a liar, said she'd fabricated the documents out of spite. The jury didn't buy it. The verdict came back in late July. Guilty on all counts. Kalen was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. 3 other executives got similar sentences. The rest took plea deals. Landon watched the news coverage alone in the garage after closing, a beer in his hand that he still wasn't drinking. When the anchor announced the verdict, he felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or just the knowledge that it was finally over. He called the number Arya had given him for emergencies. It rang 4 times before she answered. "Landon." Hey, I saw the news. Yeah. Her voice sounded tired. It's done. How do you feel? I don't know. Ask me again in a week. You coming back? There was a pause, long enough that Landon thought the call had dropped. I don't know, she said finally. The protection program says I should stay out here for a while longer, make sure there's no blowback, but She stopped. I want to. Then do it. It's not that simple. It never is. Another pause. Then Arya said, I've been thinking about what you said, about doing something that matters. I talked to a lawyer out here, and we're working on setting up a nonprofit, something that helps people who've been victims of financial fraud, legal aid, counseling, resources. I don't know if it'll work, but I want to try. Landon smiled. That's good. That's really good. Yeah, I think so too. You'll need funding. I've got some from the settlement, and there are grants. It's possible. When you're ready, let me know. I'll help. Landon, you've already done enough. I'm not offering because I have to. I'm offering because I want to. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, she said, Thank you. They talked for another 20 minutes. About Sophie, about the garage, about nothing important. When they hung up, Landon felt lighter than he had in months. August came. Then September. The garage kept growing. Landon hired a second employee, then a third. He started taking custom jobs. Restoration work, performance builds. The kind of projects he'd always wanted to do but never had the resources for. The money wasn't just good. It was enough to breathe. Sophie started third grade. She was doing well, making friends, getting good grades, laughing more. The shadow of her mother's death was still there, but it didn't swallow her the way it used to. One evening in late September, Landon was locking up the garage when a car pulled into the lot. A rental. The driver's side door opened, and Arya stepped out. Landon froze. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, lighter. She'd put on a little weight, the kind that came from not running for your life anymore. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, and she looked nervous. Hi, she said. Hi. Landon couldn't move. What are you doing here? The protection program cleared me to come back. They said the threat level's minimal now that Kaylin's locked up. She shoved her hands in her pockets. So I came back. For good? I don't know yet. Maybe. I wanted to see how it felt. Landon walked over to her, stopped a few feet away. How does it feel? She looked around. At the garage. At the street. At him. Like home, she said. Something in Landon's chest cracked open. Sophie's going to lose her mind, he said. Arya smiled. Can I see her? She'll never forgive me if you don't. They drove to the apartment together. Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework when they walked in. She looked up, saw Arya, and screamed. Miss Arya! She launched herself across the room, and Arya caught her, holding on tight. I missed you so much, Sophie said, her voice muffled against Arya's sweater. I missed you too, kiddo. They stayed like that for a long time. Landon watched from the doorway, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like hope. That night, after Sophie finally went to bed, after showing Arya every drawing she'd made, every good grade she'd gotten, every story she'd saved up to tell, Landon and Arya sat on the couch. I'm starting the nonprofit, Arya said. It's official. I filed the paperwork last week. That's amazing. I'm calling it second proof, like a second chance, but also proof that the truth matters. I like it. I'm going to need help. People who understand what it's like to fight for something that feels impossible. Landon looked at her. You asking me to get involved? Only if you want to. He thought about it. About the garage. About Sophie. About the life he'd built from nothing. About how easy it would be to say no, to keep his head down, to stay safe. But he also thought about the woman in the snow 2 days before Christmas. About the choice he'd made to help her. About how that choice had led to everything good that had happened since. Yeah, he said. I'm in. Arya smiled and it reached her eyes. Over the next few months, they built something together. Second Proof started small. A website, a few volunteers, a handful of clients who'd been scammed or defrauded and had nowhere else to turn. Arya handled the legal side, connecting people with attorneys and advocates. Landon handled logistics, fundraising, the grunt work that kept things running. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, false starts, days when it felt like they were shouting into the void. But slowly, it grew. Word spread. People started donating. News outlets picked up the story. The whistleblower who'd brought down a billionaire was now helping the people he'd hurt. By the time winter rolled around again, Second Proof had helped 60 families recover stolen money, file lawsuits, rebuild their lives. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was something. Sophie loved having Arya around. She'd moved into a small apartment 2 blocks away, close enough to visit but far enough to have her own space. Most evenings, though, she ended up at Landon's place, helping with homework, making dinner, watching bad TV, and arguing about which movies were worth staying up late for. It felt natural, easy, like they'd been doing it forever. One night in early December, almost a year to the day since Landon had found Arya in the snow, he sat on the couch watching Sophie and Arya build a gingerbread house at the kitchen table. They were arguing about the best way to attach the roof, both of them laughing, both of them covered in frosting. Landon thought about his wife, about how much she would have liked Arya, about how she would have wanted this for him, for Sophie, even if it looked different than what they'd planned. He thought about the flash drive that had started everything, about the $40 million and the trial and the 22-year sentence, about how all of it had come down to one moment on a freezing Chicago street when he could have kept walking. He thought about the choices people made, the small ones that didn't feel important at the time but ended up changing everything. Arya looked over and caught him staring. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" "About how weird life is, how you never know what's coming." Sophie held up the gingerbread house, which was crooked and covered in too much icing. "What do you think, Daddy?" "I think it's perfect," Landon said, and he meant it. Later, after Sophie was asleep and Arya was getting ready to leave, she stopped in the doorway. "I have something for you," she said. She pulled a small frame from her bag and handed it to him. Inside was the flash drive, the same one she'd been clutching that night in the snow, mounted behind glass with a small plaque at the bottom that read, "The night everything changed." Landon stared at it. "I had it made a few months ago," Arya said. "I wanted you to have it, as a reminder." "Of what?" "The doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Landon looked at her, at the woman who'd stumbled into his life terrified and desperate and alone, who'd trusted him when she had no reason to, who'd fought for the truth even when it nearly killed her. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For asking for help, for letting me be part of this." Arya smiled. "Thank you for saying yes." She left, and Landon set the frame on the shelf near the door. He looked at it for a long time, thinking about everything it represented. The risk, the fear, the choice to step into someone else's chaos and refuse to walk away. He thought about Sophie asleep in the next room, about the garage that was finally thriving, about Second Proof and the people they were helping, about Arya, who'd become part of their lives in a way that felt permanent. He thought about the life he'd built from the wreckage of the one he'd lost. It wasn't perfect, it was messy and complicated and full of uncertainties, but it was real. And it was his. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The snow started falling again that night, soft, quiet, covering the city in white. Landon stood at the window, watching it come down, and thought about how a year ago he'd been a man barely surviving, and now he was something else, something better, not because he'd been saved, but because he'd chosen to save someone else. And in doing that, he'd saved himself. The next morning, Sophie woke up early and ran to the window to see the snow. She pressed her hands against the glass, her breath fogging it up, and turned to Landon with a smile so bright it hurt to look at. "Can we build a snowman today?" she asked. "Yeah, kiddo, we can build a snowman." "Can Miss Arya come?" "I'm sure she'd love that." Sophie cheered and ran to get dressed. Landon made coffee, sent Arya a text, and stood in the kitchen of the apartment that had once felt like a tomb but now felt like a home. He thought about the people who came into your life by accident and stayed on purpose, about the storms that broke you and the ones that made you stronger, about the truth and how much it cost and how it was always worth paying the price. He thought about second chances, about the ones you gave and the ones you got, And he thought about Sophie, who was pulling on her snow boots in the other room, shouting about how big the snowman was going to be. About Arya, who would show up in 20 minutes with hot chocolate and that crooked smile. About the garage and second proof and the life they were building together. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and honest and full of the kind of love that didn't announce itself but showed up anyway, in small moments and quiet choices and snow falling on a December morning. Landon finished his coffee, grabbed his coat, and went to help Sophie with her boots. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars moved through slushy streets, people shoveled sidewalks. Somewhere, someone was starting over. Somewhere, someone was making a choice that would change everything. And Landon Hayes, 33 years old, single father, mechanic, accidental hero, stood in the doorway of his apartment and watched his daughter run into the snow, laughing, alive, free. He thought about the woman who'd asked him for help on the coldest night of the year, and he thought about how sometimes the best thing you can do is say yes when someone asks you to be brave. Because courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and helping anyway. It's about standing in the storm and refusing to let it win. It's about finding the people who make you want to fight for something bigger than yourself. And it's about learning, slowly and imperfectly, that home isn't a place. It's the people who see you at your worst and choose to stay. Arya showed up 10 minutes later carrying a thermos and wearing a hat that was too big. Sophie ran to her, grabbed her hand, and dragged her toward the park. Landon followed, hands in his pockets, watching the two of them laugh and stumble through the snow. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt whole, not healed, not fixed, but whole. And that, he thought, was enough. The first month without Arya felt like living in a house where someone had removed all the furniture but left the walls standing. Everything looked the same, but nothing worked the way it used to. Landon went through the motions, woke up, got Sophie ready for school, fixed cars, paid bills, went to bed. But the rhythm felt wrong, offbeat. Like he'd forgotten the steps to a dance he used to know by heart. Sophie asked about Arya constantly at first. When is Miss Arya coming back? Can we call her? Does she still have Mr. Flopsy? Landon answered as best he could, which wasn't well. He didn't know when she was coming back. He didn't have a number to call. And yes, he was pretty sure she still had the rabbit. After a few weeks, Sophie's questions came less often. Kids had a way of adapting that adults didn't. They grieved and moved forward at the same time, like it was possible to hold both things at once without breaking. Landon wished he knew how to do that. The settlement money arrived in mid-February. $250,000 wired directly into his account with an official letter from a law firm he'd never heard of, explaining that it was his, legally and completely, no strings attached. He stared at the number on his phone screen for 20 minutes, refreshing the banking app over and over like the zeros might disappear if he looked away. They didn't. He paid off every debt he had. Credit cards. Medical bills from when Sophie had been sick 2 winters ago, and the insurance barely covered anything. The 3 months of back rent he'd been carrying like a stone in his chest. When it was done, he still had nearly $200,000 left. For the first time in his adult life, Landon Hayes could breathe without doing the math in his head first. He put half of it into a college fund for Sophie. The other half he sank into the garage. Because the garage, Hayes Auto Repair, the place that had kept him alive for the past 3 years, was falling apart. The roof leaked. The lift made sounds that meant expensive. The tools were older than Sophie, and the sign out front had been missing 2 letters since before Landon's wife died. He started small. New tools. A functioning heater instead of the rattling space heater that barely worked. He fixed the roll-up door so it didn't sound like it was screaming every time it opened. He replaced the cracked concrete in the bay, patched the roof, repainted the walls. Slowly, the place stopped looking like somewhere you went to die and started looking like somewhere you went to work. Word spread faster than he expected. Part of it was the improvements, but part of it was his name. People knew who he was now, the mechanic who'd helped expose Kalin Global. Some folks came because they were curious. Others came because they respected what he'd done. A few came because they'd been investors in Kalin's firm and wanted to shake his hand. Landon didn't know what to do with any of it, so he just kept working. By March, he couldn't keep up alone. He hired Marcus, a 22-year-old kid fresh out of trade school with more enthusiasm than skill, but a willingness to learn that reminded Landon of himself at that age. He taught Marcus the way he'd been taught, by doing it, screwing it up, and doing it again until it was right. "Why do you care so much about getting it perfect?" Marcus asked one afternoon, frustrated after Landon made him redo a brake job for the third time. "Because someone's driving this car home to their family," Landon said. "And I'm not sending them out there with work that might fail." Marcus nodded, swallowed his pride, and did it again. This time, he got it right. In April, a letter arrived. No return address, postmarked from Denver, Colorado. Landon opened it standing in the middle of the garage, grease still on his hands. The handwriting was Arya's. "Landon, I'm okay, can't tell you much, but I'm safe. The trial's moving forward. They think it'll start in June. I think about you and Sophie every day. Tell her I miss her. Tell her Mr. Flopsy is in good hands. I hope the garage is doing well. I hope you are too. I'll write again when I can." Landon read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the glove box of his truck where he wouldn't lose it. That night, he told Sophie. She made him read the letter out loud 3 times, then insisted on writing back immediately. She filled 2 pages with drawings of snowmen and stick figures and a very ambitious rendering of the kitten Mrs. Graham had recently adopted. At the bottom, in her careful second-grade handwriting, she wrote, "I miss you. Come home soon. Love, Sophie." Landon mailed it to a P.O. box Arya had scribbled at the bottom of her letter. He didn't know if she'd get it, but it felt important to try. 2 weeks later, another letter came. Then another. They were short, cautious, careful not to reveal too much about where she was or what she was doing, but they were something, a thread connecting them across the distance. In June, the trial started. Landon watched it on the news when he could, between jobs and during lunch breaks. Arya testified for 3 straight days, walking the jury through spreadsheets and emails and bank transfers with the same calm precision she'd shown that night in the garage. The defense tried to break her, called her vindictive, said she'd fabricated evidence, painted her as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. She didn't flinch, just kept telling the truth over and over until it was impossible not to believe her. Richard Kalin took the stand on the 4th day. He denied everything, said Arya was lying, said the documents were doctored. He smiled at the jury like he was doing them a favor by being there. The jury didn't smile back. The verdict came on a Thursday in late July. Guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy. 22 years in federal prison. 3 other executives got similar sentences. The rest took plea deals and shorter terms. Landon watched the news coverage alone in the garage after closing. When the verdict was announced, he felt something in his chest loosen. Not relief exactly, more like the absence of a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. He pulled out his phone and called the emergency number Arya had given him months ago. She answered on the 4th ring. "Landon? Hey, I saw the news." "Yeah." Her voice sounded hollow, tired. "It's over." "How do you feel?" "I don't know yet. Ask me again in a week." "Fair enough." He paused. "You coming back?" There was a long silence. Long enough that Landon thought maybe the call had dropped. "I don't know," she said finally. "The protection program wants me to stay out here a little longer. Make sure there's no fallout, but I..." She stopped, started again. "I want to." "Then do it. It's not that simple." "It never is." She laughed, small and bitter. "No, it's not." Then quieter. "I've been thinking about what you said, about doing something that matters. I talked to a lawyer out here. We're setting up a nonprofit to help people who've been hurt by fraud. Legal aid, counseling, resources to rebuild. I don't know if it'll work, but I want to try." Landon smiled even though she couldn't see it. "That's good, really good." "You think so?" "I know so. I'm going to need help. People who understand what it's like to fight for something when everyone tells you it's impossible." "You asking?" "Only if you want to." Landon thought about the garage, about Sophie, about the life he'd built in the wreckage of the old one, about how easy it would be to say no, to stay safe, to keep his head down and his world small. But he also thought about the woman in the snow, about the choice he'd made to help her, about how that choice had changed everything. "Yeah," he said. "I'm in." He could hear her smile through the phone. "Thank you." They talked for another half hour about nothing important. about Sophie's obsession with learning to ride a bike, about the kitten Mrs. Graham had adopted that kept escaping into the hallway, about how weird it was to watch your own life become a news story. When they hung up, Landon sat in the dark garage for a while, staring at nothing, feeling something that might have been hope. August came, then September. The garage kept growing. Landon hired 2 more people, a woman named Diane who'd been fixing cars longer than Landon had been alive, and a quiet guy named Jesse who didn't talk much but could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. The work was steady, good, enough to pay everyone a living wage and still have money left over. Sophie started 3rd grade. She was doing well, making friends, bringing home spelling tests with stars on them, laughing more than she had in years. The grief over her mother was still there, but it didn't swallow her whole anymore. It was just part of her now, part of who she was becoming. One evening in late September, Landon was locking up the garage when a car pulled into the lot. A rental sedan. The driver's door opened and Arya stepped out. Landon froze. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, lighter. She'd gained a little weight, the kind that came from not running for your life anymore. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that looked too big, and she looked nervous in a way that made her seem younger than he remembered. "Hi," she said. Landon couldn't find words for a moment. Then, "What are you doing here?" "They cleared me to come back. Said the threat level's basically 0 now that Kaylin's in prison and everyone else took deals." She shoved her hands in her pockets. "So I came back. For good?" "I don't know yet. Maybe. I wanted to see how it felt." Landon walked over to her, stopped a few feet away. "How does it feel?" She looked around, at the garage with its new paint and fixed sign, at the street with its evening traffic and fading light, at him. "Like home," she said. Something in Landon's chest cracked open. "Sophie's going to lose her mind," he said. Arya's face lit up. "Can I see her?" "She'll never forgive me if you don't." They drove to the apartment in Arya's rental. Landon called ahead to make sure Sophie was home, told Mrs. Graham there was a surprise coming, but didn't explain what. When they walked through the door, Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework, pencil in hand, tongue sticking out in concentration. She looked up, saw Arya, screamed, "Miss Arya!" She launched herself across the room so fast she knocked her chair over. Arya caught her, held on tight, and Landon saw tears streaming down both their faces. "I missed you so much," Sophie said, her voice muffled against Arya's shoulder. "I missed you too, kiddo. So much." They stayed like that for a long time. Landon stood in the doorway, watching, feeling something enormous and fragile expanding in his chest. That night, after Sophie finally went to bed, after showing Arya every drawing she'd made, every book she'd read, every story she'd been saving up to tell, Landon and Arya sat on the couch with the kind of exhaustion that felt good. "I filed the paperwork last week," Arya said. "The nonprofit. It's official." "That's amazing. What are you calling it?" "Second proof. Like a second chance, but also proof that telling the truth matters." "I like it. I'm going to need help. People who know what it's like to fight when everything's stacked against you." "I told you I'm in." "I know, but I wanted to make sure you still meant it." Landon looked at her. "I meant it." She nodded, and something passed between them. Not a promise, exactly, more like an understanding. Over the next few months, they built Second Proof together. Started small, a website, a handful of volunteers, a few clients who'd been scammed and had nowhere else to turn. Arya handled the legal side, connecting people with attorneys and advocates. Landon handled logistics, fundraising, the grunt work that kept the lights on. It was hard. There were days when it felt impossible, when the problems were too big and the resources too small. But slowly, it grew. Word spread. People donated. News outlets picked up the story. The whistleblower who'd brought down a billionaire was now helping the people he'd hurt. By the time winter rolled around again, Second Proof had helped 83 families, recovered stolen money, filed lawsuits, rebuilt lives. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was something. Arya moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from Landon's. She said she needed her own space, and Landon understood that. But most evenings, she ended up at his place anyway, helping Sophie with homework, making dinner, watching terrible movies and arguing about which ones were worth finishing. It felt easy, natural, like they'd been doing it forever. One night in early December, almost exactly a year since Landon had found Arya in the snow, he sat on the couch watching her and Sophie build a gingerbread house at the kitchen table. They were arguing about the structural integrity of the roof, both of them laughing, both of them covered in frosting. Landon thought about his wife, about how much she would have liked Arya, about how she would have wanted this for him, for Sophie, even if it looked nothing like what they'd planned. He thought about the flash drive, about the $40 million and the trial and the sentence, about how all of it had come down to one moment on a frozen street when he could have kept walking. He thought about choices, about how the small ones mattered just as much as the big ones, about how you never really knew which was which until later. Arya looked over and caught him staring. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" "About how weird life is. How you can't plan any of it." Sophie held up the gingerbread house, which was crooked and collapsing on one side. "What do you think, Daddy?" "I think it's perfect," Landon said. Later, after Sophie was asleep and Arya was getting ready to leave, she stopped at the door and pulled something from her bag. "I made this for you," she said, handing him a small frame. Inside was the flash drive, the same one she'd been clutching that night, the one that had started everything. It was mounted behind glass with a small plaque at the bottom that read, "The night everything changed." Landon stared at it. "I had it made a few months ago," Arya said. "I wanted you to have it, as a reminder." "Of what?" "That doing the right thing matters, even when it's terrifying, even when you don't know if it'll work." Landon looked at her, at the woman who'd stumbled into his life barefoot and desperate and alone, who'd trusted him when she had no reason to, who'd fought for the truth even when it almost killed her. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For asking for help, for letting me be part of this." Arya smiled. "Thank you for saying yes." She left, and Landon set the frame on the shelf by the door. He looked at it for a long time, thinking about everything it represented. The fear, the risk, the choice to step into someone else's chaos and refuse to walk away. He thought about Sophie, asleep in the next room, safe and loved and whole in ways that mattered more than the ways she was still broken. He thought about the garage, thriving now, full of life. He thought about Second Proof and the people they were helping, about Arya, who'd become part of their lives in a way that felt permanent, even though neither of them had said it out loud. He thought about the life he'd built from the wreckage of the one he'd lost. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and full of uncertainty, but it was real. And it was his, and it was enough. The snow started falling that night. Soft at first, then heavier, covering the city in white. Landon stood at the window, watching it come down, and thought about how a year ago he'd been drowning. And now he was something else. Not saved, exactly, but swimming, moving forward. The next morning, Sophie woke up early and ran to the window. "Daddy, it snowed!" "I see that, kiddo. Can we build a snowman?" "Yeah, we can build a snowman." "Can Miss Arya come?" Landon smiled. "I'm sure she'd love that." Sophie ran to get dressed, and Landon made coffee and sent Arya a text. She replied almost immediately, "On my way." 20 minutes later, she showed up with hot chocolate in a thermos and a hat that was too big for her head. Sophie grabbed her hand and dragged her toward the park down the street, chattering about how big the snowman was going to be, how they needed to find the perfect sticks for arms. Landon followed, hands in his pockets, watching the two of them stumble through the snow together. And somewhere in that moment, in the cold air, and the laughter, and the way Arya looked back at him with a smile that felt like an invitation, Landon realized something. He'd spent 3 years surviving, putting one foot in front of the other because Sophie needed him to. Going through the motions because that's what you did when your world fell apart. But this, watching his daughter play in the snow with someone who'd become family without either of them planning it, feeling the weight of the past lift just enough to breathe. This wasn't surviving. This was living, and the difference mattered. They built the snowman together. Sophie insisted it needed a scarf, so Arya ran back to her apartment and returned with one. Landon found stones for the eyes and a carrot for the nose. They stood back when it was finished, admiring their work, and Sophie announced it was the best snowman in the entire city. You think so? Arya asked. I know so. Well, if you know so, it must be true. Sophie grinned and ran off to make snow angels. Arya turned to Landon. You okay? Yeah, I am. You sure? He nodded. I'm sure. She studied his face for a moment, then smiled. Good. They stood there in the cold, watching Sophie make patterns in the snow, and Landon thought about all the things he'd learned in the past year. About courage and fear and the impossibly thin line between them. About how helping someone else could save you in ways you didn't expect. About family, not the kind you were born into, but the kind you chose. The kind you built from nothing. He thought about how life didn't give you what you planned for. It gave you what you needed, even if you didn't know you needed it. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it gave you a second chance. Not to go back, not to fix what broke, but to start again. To build something new from the pieces. To find people who made you want to be braver than you thought you could be. Sophie ran back over, breathless and pink-cheeked. Can we come back tomorrow? If it's still snowing, yeah. What if it's not? Then we'll find something else to do. Like what? Landon looked at Arya. She shrugged, smiling. I don't know, kiddo, he said. We'll figure it out. And that, Landon thought, was the truth of it. You didn't need to have all the answers. You didn't need to know what was coming next. You just needed to show up, to help when someone asked, to say yes when it mattered, to build something, a life, a family, a home, from whatever you had. Even if what you had was just a stranger in the snow and a choice to stop walking. Even if it was terrifying. Even if you didn't know if it would work. Because sometimes the best things in life came from the moments when you decided to be brave anyway. And Landon Hayes, mechanic, father, ordinary man who'd done one extraordinary thing, understood that now in a way he hadn't before. He looked at Sophie and Arya, both of them laughing, both of them covered in snow, both of them here. And he thought, yeah, this is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything.